Good morning and welcome to Communication Week. Hopefully you're all having a great morning. Thanks for coming. A lot of you are probably in an audio storytelling class, is that right? Some of you? But definitely there are others joining in, so that's awesome. I was asked to introduce this round of guest speakers. I am happy to do so, but I'm also not prepared. So it's a little extraneous speaking. We have Kylie Cameron with us, and Kylie is I'm going to try to guess, 2020, I think, graduate of the Elliott School. Is it, well, you're not spring 2020?
December.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's why I'm going off. She was the editor-in-chief of the Sunflower, and she was a political science and journalism major. She did a dual degree, and then is now a reporter at KMUW. Daniel Caudill is also a reporter at KMUW. He's taking a more non-traditional route in that he got hired up before he finished his degree, so he's still working on finishing his degree, but also has been studying, right? Are you not?
I am, yeah.
Okay. I'm going to hunt you down after. He's also been studying political science and journalism, as well as some other things. So both doing a great job at KMUW, and we're happy to have them here today to talk to you about audio storytelling. Hopefully you all note your questions along the way. Ask them. Probably they don't mind if you chime in.
Go ahead. Yep.
They're both pretty informal people. So let them know if you have a question. They've also brought some awesome swag. I told them they should hold on to that and make you ask questions before they reward you with all that cool swag.
It was her idea, not ours.
So thank you guys both for being here. Take it away.
Yeah, so as Amy said, we'll have a portion for questions at the end, but if you have questions throughout, obviously you can raise your hand, interrupt us, we don't care. So we're going to be talking to you a little bit about audio storytelling and reporting in general, as well as a little bit more specifics about KMUW, and so you can get a little bit familiarized with your own local public radio station. So real quick before we get started, I guess I'm just kind of curious, as far as in the audience, who's more interested in print versus broadcast? So just by show of hands, who's more interested in like print or digital journalism and writing? Okay. And then who's more interested in broadcast? Okay. So yeah, a little bit more broadcast, I guess, because you guys are in an audio storytelling class. But we'll go ahead and get started. Unless you have anything else to say. So yeah, a little bit about KMUW. This is our lovely office space during the winter when it was a little bit colder, when we had all that snow earlier. We were established in 1949. We're the NPR affiliate for Wichita and South Central Kansas. So we have supporters who are in Winfield and other towns in South Central Kansas. Obviously, as many of you may already know, as a public radio station, we are a nonprofit. So that means that we're not really motivated by a profit incentive, but we have donors and listeners who support us for a mission. So obviously our mission would be to provide quality, accurate news to our listeners. So we also partner with other public radio stations in Kansas, including KPR, which is in Lawrence, and then we have KCUR, which is actually in Kansas City, Missouri. And we are actually licensed through Wichita State, so there's kind of a good relationship there between the university and the station. And yeah, obviously we have great connections with Elliott School because a lot of our staff members are former Elliott School students, and then we have an internship program, which we'll get a little bit more into later in the presentation, where all of you guys have an opportunity to come work with us. So you want to take this?
Yeah, so I guess we'll start out. We kind of wanted this presentation to be like, this is how we go out and do our reporting. So once we get assigned a story, really like what you have to do is set up your interviews. And so that comes with your interview sound. That's not what's happening in this picture, but you'll go out and you'll do your interviews. I've done them multiple different ways, whether that be through, your test cam recorder. I forgot my recorder, but I have my little microphone that is supposed to be attached to my recorder that I left on my desk. But there's also options where you can do those interviews through Zoom. I did an interview through Zoom Saturday because that person was out of town, but I needed to talk to them. And let's see, we record through YouTube and other various things.
Yeah, sometimes we might record like a meeting, a government meeting, a city or county government meeting.
So that's like your typical sound that you kind of gather, obviously, first and foremost.
Yeah, that's kind of just like print in a sense, because you got to start with your interviews first, right? But obviously the difference is when you're in broadcast, you have to make sure that the audio is quality enough to be able to use on the air. So you can't just like record with your phone.
Yeah. So then you'll also have sounds that set a scene, and that's exactly what's happening in this picture. Lindsay is a intern. Sorry to call you out. I didn't realize you'd be here. Is an intern for us at KMUW, and she's amazing and she's awesome. And so a week or 2 weeks ago, probably, I took her out. We went to this gym that's downtown. The story's coming out this Friday, so be sure to listen for it. It's a sober living gym, and it's a feature that we're doing about this gym. And so part of that with the feature is we want to have sounds that set that scene. And so we decided to just check out a class one afternoon. And so we just, kind of followed people around the gym as they were working out. A lot of encouragement too, like the come on guys, like let's go, clapping, stuff like that. And so that's what we recorded to kind of have going on in the background as you're listening to that feature.
Yeah, just as Kylie's saying, a lot of times it can just be something as simple as white noise or ambient sound. Sometimes it's even something as simple as an air conditioner or cars driving by. But basically the idea is that it just kind of fills the noise a little bit. So as you're listening, it's a little more engaging than just listening to pure interview tape. So a lot of times we're trying to be a little bit creative about what kind of sounds we can incorporate. But at the same time, a lot of times it can be something pretty simple. Because you'd be surprised what even just an AC unit could do as far as filling the air.
Yeah, and it kind of helps fill that space too, to where it's not as jarring. So when you're listening to an audio feature, we'll be voicing something and then it'll jump to a cut. But you want to have something to fill in that space between the two, so that it kind of is more fluid and like coherent, and just doesn't jump from place to place, and it kind of more introduces you into where that person is.
It's kind of similar in a way to, like, if you guys know about TV journalism and documentaries and stuff like that. I kind of think of it like B-roll. It's not necessarily like the focus of your story being shown in the B-roll all the time, but a lot of times it's just like supplementary, kind of helps build the setting or the scene that you're placing the story in. Just one of those packaging elements. Oh, and Kylie kind of talked about this already. Yeah. Sometimes, I'm thinking of this weight story. Kylie might have a point where she's talking and then she has a cut from somebody else. So what she might do is take the sound of like weights clanking, just a little bite, and you place that between Kylie and the person that's going to be talking next. It's just like a little thing, but it's almost hard to really describe without hearing it, but you guys will hear some examples in a second. Yeah, here we go. So we have a few different examples that we've picked out of stories that we've written. So the first one I'm actually going to not use this one. I have another one in mind. Here we go. This one. So the sound setup is working, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. So yeah, this story I wrote is about there was a local union drive at a Starbucks here. A lot of you guys may have already heard about that story nationally. And so I kind of just want to play it, and then maybe we can talk about it a little bit, but see if you can hear any of what we've already talked about in this piece.
Workers at the Starbucks store at 21st and Amadon are the first in Wichita to file for union representation, joining a nationwide effort to unionize the giant coffee chain. As KMUW's Daniel Caudill explains, the workers represent a movement of young organizers who see unions as the key to not only better pay and benefits, but to building collective power that can lift up workers from all industries and walks of life.
Maya Cuellar Serafini is a barista and leading organizer in the local Starbucks union drive. At another coffee shop, she reflects on her first time organizing a workplace. The 24-year-old is a barista and leading organizer in the local Starbucks union drive. At another coffee shop, she reflects on her first time organizing a workplace. The 24-year-old is no stranger to the concept, since her father was a longtime member of the Kansas Teachers Union. But go back just one more generation in her family, and Cuellar Serafini says you'll find the appeal of unions.
My grandpa worked on the railroads, and he was Mexican-American, and he definitely was not part of a union and was not afforded the same rights and fair treatment that his white counterparts were.
If success, but it's a little hard to hear, but you guys maybe were able to hear some of the clinking, some of the like customers talking, things like that. Pretty much all we did was we just set up at a coffee shop and we talked. In this case, Starbucks wasn't going to give me access to one of their locations. So we just went to another coffee shop and we talked and you can kind of hear some of that going on. And obviously, one thing that you may have heard is me say at another coffee shop. I explicitly said that in the piece because we didn't want listeners to think that we were at Starbucks. You know, you don't want to deceive your listeners even over something that seemingly small. So that's just one example of just a subtle, quiet, ambient noise that you can kind of play under the story that just fills the noise a little bit. And then this one is a little bit more of a variety of sounds. So you'll hear that it's not just ambient, but you'll hear video game music, you'll hear clicking of controllers, you'll hear people talking. So this one is a little bit more like, I guess, fun to put together. I will go ahead and skip
Since
ahead
the
a little bit.
days teens tethered to the basement couch, but as Daniel college scholarship and perhaps a professional career.
It's game night at Wichita State, and members of the varsity esports team are practicing just before their match. Inside the esports lab, there's a lot of what you might expect from athletes in a traditional locker room. Jokes, banter, discussions about the match ahead. But in this case, the noise is also accompanied by video game music and the steady click-clack of controllers.
Esports, for lack of a better term, is competitive gaming.
That's Travis Yang, the new director of esports at Wichita State. At just 27 years old, he's returning home to Wichita with years of experience in the esports industry. Piece again, but you guys kind of get the idea. You know, it kind of starts out like I have the story in mind. I talk about it with my editor, and I decide, I'm going to go hang out with the esports team for a little bit, talk to some of the players about what they're doing, and the program that's starting here. So, the most immediate thing that jumps out to me as far as sound would be video game music and noises and the sounds of people playing video games. So pretty basic, but it also adds a lot to the piece.
Yeah. So Daniel talked about a little bit about planning ahead for sound. So obviously with that video game piece, he was talking about, I'll get video game noises, I'll get them, bantering back and forth while they're playing, stuff like that. But with this first clip that I'll play for you guys, I had no idea kind of what I was getting into when it came to this. Just a little bit of background, and you guys have probably seen it when you're coming onto campus. But directly south of here, off of 17th Street, there were quadplexes that lower income international students used to live at that are now, they're bulldozed, they're completely knocked over now to build luxury student apartments. And I found this out through a city council meeting. They had to go through like a rezoning case to be able to even make these builds. And so obviously I decided to go into the neighborhood and knock on all those doors and talk to those people and see what their experiences were, because they were only given 60 days to move out. That's 60 days to save up for a security deposit, first month's rent, and to find a new place to live and pack up all your stuff and move. And so I decided to just go and knock on every single door in that little cul-de-sac that these quadplexes were at. And, I didn't have sound in mind when I did this. I just decided to just go knock on these doors and see what people had to say to me, if they even wanted to talk to me. And, the first thing I noticed when I got onto the cul-de-sac was it was a really, really hot morning in June. So everybody's air conditioning units were going, the little, window units. And they were loud, like they were working overtime because of how hot it was. And so that's exactly what
Driving
I
along
gathered
17th Street south of
for
Wichita
this.
State, the housing there looks much different than it did years ago. Brick homes and duplexes are being replaced by shiny gray and yellow apartment buildings. And while the new buildings are bringing more students to the area, it's also pushing some out. Kylie Cameron has more.
This summer, the hum of air conditioning units filled the air as residents walked down Roosevelt Court. But by the first week of classes at Wichita State, the hum was replaced by
I was in the
construction
neighborhood
equipment.
again.
Quadplexes built
because
in
I
the
had heard that
1950s directly across from the
homes were being
university's
demolished
campus
now.
are now gone.
The construction
The
company
units
had
that
come
once
in.
stood on the cul-de-sac were occupied by
And
mostly
so I had
international
my recorder
students
on
and their
me, and I went
families.
into the
The
neighborhood, and
demolition
they
is part
had their
of 2 phases
construction
of
equipment
development
out there
along 17th
demolishing all
Street
of
for
these
student
homes.
apartments owned
And
by
so that's
17th
exactly what I
Management.
did. Was I jumped
The first
from,
project was between
you know,
Yale
there were
and
people
Harvard.
living here. They
Now,
had their lives
developers
here.
are
They had
making way for the
families.
second
A lot of
phase
them
of Block
actually had
East on
kids.
Roosevelt Court.
I don't think it's a
And
bad
then
thing to like develop
you come
more
in
and
a couple
make
months
nicer
later,
places,
and here are all
but
these
I feel
construction
like they probably could
equipment
have been a bit more
demolishing the homes that they
open
once
about
lived in.
what they were planning on doing.
And
That's
so I
Jacob
wanted to have that
Tollefson, who
comparison
lived on
in that
Roosevelt
story
Court
to really
earlier
put
this year
people
with his
in
fiancee, who
their
was a
shoes.
WSU student.
Because
This
I think
isn't
a
the
lot of
first
our
time he's dealt with
listeners
his
are
rental
kind of,
home being demolished.
I would say, probably a
also
little
lived
more
on
well
Yale.
off, and so I wanted them
Tollefson
to
says ahead
be
of the
able to
first
kind of
demolition,
experience
he was
that as
offered
much as they
assistance
could.
with his move or access to another unit.
And then I'll briefly go over this one, just because it's just more coffee shop sound. I did a story about Leslie Coffee Co., but they really, you know, they're not just a coffee shop, but they also serve as kind of a community space for not just people coming in and buying coffee, but for the unhoused community in that area, especially those who live in the area and are stuck in that food desert. There's no grocery store. There's no place for them to get fresh produce. And so they have a community fridge in there.
Yeah.
Coffee shops are often thought of as a
And
community
so again,
space,
it's just, you know,
a place
coffee
for
shop
people to
noise.
gather.
It's
One in
it
Delano
sounds you're
took
like
that
really
idea a step
familiar with
further
that
and is
kind of
helping
set the
those in
tone
need. Kylie
for
Cameron
you.
visited the shop to learn more.
Yeah, so that's the coffee
Walking
beans
into Leslie
grinding
Coffee Co.
to make the
in Delano,
espresso.
the first thing you might notice is the aroma of espresso, or the various plants around the shop. But as you look around more, there's a brightly colored fridge sitting
And
in a
then
corner
glasses
alongside a
clinking.
rack of non-perishable foods.
Delano's an area that does have an unhoused community, low-income families who, you know, might be struggling and need assistance. I think also Delano is an area it's kind of like on the border of being a food desert.
That's Sarah Leslie. She
I would also point out with that clip that, can you put it?
Yeah.
Okay, I don't know how to do it.
Yeah.
Not as hip with technology. I would also point out, if you're going out and doing interviews in loud spaces like coffee shops, to try to minimize the background music. I think the biggest struggle, and I didn't even realize it while I was doing the interviews, because to me, to my ears, it's just background music, and I kind of tuned it out. But then as I was going back and listening to my tape from that interview, you could tell the music was really loud. And that really makes the transition between my voice and her voice and everybody else's voices in that story really hard to jump around to. And so we had to get very creative and fix that.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, for some of the one-on-one interviews you have, what kind of sound capture do you usually use, and can you ask your interviewee to use something like a lav mic that gets in closer and cuts out all the background noise?
Yeah, we typically, it kind of depends on what the setting is, but
Yeah.
I think the thing we use most often would be an Omni mic, so just like a typical mic.
Something like this.
Yeah, and then, but we do have lavalier mics, and those work as well. So it kind of just depends on what you're more comfortable with, I guess. And then as far as like, were you asking also is like what kind of sound to get if you're with a one-on-one or, yeah. So I think sometimes it can be a little hard because each interview may not have an immediately obvious sound that you could use. But sometimes, like I've said, it could be as simple as like one thing that we're always told to do when we go to an interview is get about 3 to 5 minutes of just what we call room sound. So it could just be like in this room, I would just stand here. It'd be quiet. You would hear the AC running, maybe the hum of like the lights or something like that. That's ultimately going to make it to where you could go in and then mix your voice with that person's voice, and it's going to feel like you're in the same place, if that makes sense. It's going to make it to where we could take that room sound, put it under my voice, and then it's going to feel like I'm talking from the same place I interviewed them. And sometimes that's enough. I mean, it may not be the most exciting thing, but it can work. So
Yeah, and so that's what's difficult about like background music and stuff, is it's kind of hard to record those things.
Yeah.
And you're also not sure if you should record those things because of like copyright and
Mhm.
stuff. So if there is like background music or anything going on, typically, like if you're in a smaller place, like a coffee shop or something like that, you just tell them like, hey, like I'm doing an interview. Would you mind if we kind of like tone down the music a little bit? Or, I'm only going for a couple minutes. Can we like just cut it off for a minute and then I'll like be out of your hair. And so after that coffee shop interview, I did an interview at Dead Center Vintage downtown, and they had music going in the background. And I learned from my mistake, and I went up to the register and I said, hey, not to kill your guys' vibe, but I'm doing an interview for like a couple minutes. And can you tone it down a little bit? And they were actually really cool about it and just shut off the music for me for like the 15 or so minute interview that I did in their space. They're really cool people, so that was really nice.
Another example that I would bring up is I did a story about a sneaker collector and reseller. He has a space at the mall. And so when we did the interview, I asked him to turn the music off. But then what I did is I asked him to turn the music back on when we were done. And I put my mic up to the speaker for about 3 or 5 minutes and got the song that would have been playing. And then it's kind of like, seems kind of weird, but then I had my interview tape with no background music, and I was able to take the background music and play it under my voice as well as his voice. So that's another option if you're in a place with music. In that story, I felt like the music was kind of part of the scene. Like it was like when you come into the shoe store, you hear the music, you see the sneakers, you see the cool art on the walls, all that stuff. So to me, it was like the music was part of setting that scene in that instance. And then another thing is I know that typically, like if we use a copyrighted song, we have fair use on the radio, to my knowledge, but online sometimes we have to alter it a little bit. So briefly, we'll talk a little bit about our equipment that we use. As Kylie mentioned, we were going to bring them, but it's okay. We use these things called Tascam recorders. They're these little black square recorders. They kind of look like tasers, honestly. But then we will typically use an Omni mic, which this one's a shotgun mic. So it's like kind of longer and skinnier. So you can see this one is a little bit better for like not the greatest sound setups because you can use it like at a noisy press conference or something like that. Or like sometimes one frustration that we encounter a lot is that we'll go to a press conference and they won't set up like what's called a mult box. So we can't just plug in and get the feed from their mics. That can be really annoying. So these mics are good for that because you can stand at kind of a distance and still pick up the sound. The other type of mic that we mostly use is called an Omni mic, and it's because it's an omnidirectional mic. This one's kind of more of a directed mic, whereas the omnidirectional mic is typically what we'll use for just one-on-one interviews, situations where the sound setup's a little bit better. And then lastly, we use lavalier mics sometimes as well, like kind of like the ones we're wearing where you clip them on. Those can be good, like if you're outside. Sometimes I know those are a little bit better for not getting wind.
These are also what they use. Do you guys watch the Tiny Desk concerts, the NPR? Yeah. These are also what they use for those. So.
Oh, okay. I didn't even know that. So.
Yeah.
And then obviously a lot of times as a broadcast reporter, you kind of have a little more equipment than just a print reporter. You'll have your Tascam, your mic, your headphones. Sometimes you might have a camera or a notepad. So it can get a little cumbersome, but also it's kind of fun.
If you can take out like a buddy or something with you,
Yeah.
I'm always a fan of that.
Yeah,
I always like
that
to grab
helps.
our interns or something so then they can get pictures or something like that when we go out in the field. Because then that also gives them a chance to, have experience, but also be published somewhere, even if it's just a couple photos or something like that. Or it gives them some producing credit. So, like for the range pieces, if they kind of help out with that, we try to credit them for that. So if they help us gather sound or something.
And then beyond that, I guess another piece of equipment that's kind of worth bringing up is the software that we use. So after we've collected all of our tape, we've collected our sound, and then we've got our own voice record, or we've got our own script written out. We have to record our voice and then mix it in something called Adobe Audition. So a lot of you guys might be familiar with that already because of the class you're in. If not, I think of it like an audio version of Photoshop. Basically, you're taking pieces of audio and then mixing it all together, editing it, fine-tuning it. So
it's like one of my favorite parts. I thought I would hate it. I really thought I would hate producing audio. I love it.
It's
so much
it's fun. Yeah, I think that's actually one of the most fun parts because it's kind of like you have all your pieces and then you get to kind of perfectly balance it out how you want to. And I'd say it might also be the most difficult part, especially if you don't have a lot of experience with it. It's kind of the steepest learning curve, I think, is Audition. But we have some really great producers who help us out. So, okay, so here I got just like a good old Venn diagram. I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the differences between writing for print and writing for radio. Kylie and I both basically got our start at the Sunflower here. So we have a little bit more of a print background, but we kind of wanted to show that the transition from print to radio is not that bad. So I guess the first thing I would say about the difference between print and radio is that typically print writing tends to be a little bit more formal. Obviously, you're using a little bit more descriptive language. You're having multiple thoughts per sentence, oftentimes using commas and other things to kind of like get as much information as you can in there. On the other hand, radio is a lot more casual and conversational. It's kind of like how I'm talking to you guys right now. We use words like it's and don't. What are those words called? Contractions? Something like that. I don't know. I'm not a grammar guy, so whatever. But we use words like that. It sounds a lot more conversational, like we're talking to someone. We use one thought per sentence. So the idea is that your thoughts are very brief and to the point. And I think that has a lot to do with the medium, right? Because if someone is listening and they tune in at a weird time, I think it just kind of helps them get back on track to what you're talking about.
Another note, you are to the point when you're writing for radio. It's really funny because, I think Daniel and I, we come from print backgrounds, but also we did a lot of almost follow the money type things sometimes when we were at the Sunflower. So we're used to writing with numbers and stuff like that. But that was one of the biggest things I had to overcome with radio is you don't use a ton of numbers actually in your radio script.
Yeah.
Or you're a little more casual with it. Because if you're just throwing out all these numbers, all these percentages, stuff like that, and you're in your car, you're wherever when you're listening, it confuses people.
Yeah, for sure. I try to limit it to maybe one actual number per because the typical radio spot is between 30 seconds and a minute. So this is your daily news. I try to limit it to maybe one number or two numbers, and you're doing a lot more things like about 1 in 5, whereas the number might be 22%. But in the radio, you're not going to say 22%. You're going to say about a fifth or about 1 in 5 or something like that. Something that would sound more conversational. And I think a big piece of that is that if you see a news story online or in print, you have every opportunity to go back and reread what was said, so you can get a better hold on those numbers and statistics. But on the radio, it's kind of passing you by, so you kind of have to just say it in a way that hopefully they'll pick it up and it'll stick with them. They're not going to remember 22.6, but they might remember 1 in 5 or a fifth. Another thing is just that in radio, we typically are writing in present tense, which I think is also really hard to get used to if you're a print writer, because you're saying things like said with all your quotes. But in radio, we would say something more like says, or it's very rare that we even say said at all, because it tends to be much more present tense. And that just has to do with the format. So some of the things that they have in common, we still do write in AP style. There's a few things we might tweak here and there, like for our newscasters. Maybe if they prefer it written out a certain way, we might do that. But learning AP style like you guys are right now will come in handy, even if you don't end up writing for print. Obviously, we have to strive to be accurate. We fact check things that we put in there. We have conversations with our editor about the best way to describe something to make sure that it's accurate and coming across correctly. We do still write in third person. I guess maybe one exception would be sometimes if you're listening to NPR, like a program, they might actually say you sometimes, oh, we want to hear from you, things like that. But typically we're writing in third person. And then obviously we, just like about accuracy, we have conversations about whether things are newsworthy. Some of you guys will learn some of those elements in writing for a mass audience, such as, proximity, novelty, things like that, all those different elements that actually make a story worth reporting on.
Yeah, I will say getting your start in print or having any sort of writing experience before you go into radio, before you go into broadcast, or, kind of your more niche, whatever it is that you want to do, makes it so much easier to make that transition. I think the thing that bothered me the most while I was editor at the Sunflower was I would talk to a lot of people. I would talk to a lot of students and ask them hey, why aren't you working for the Sunflower? Or why aren't you going out and doing internships at, digital mediums or something like that? And they'd be like, oh, because I want to go into broadcast and it doesn't give me broadcast experience. And it's okay, but it does give you writing experience. It does give you experience working in news. and helping you figure out what is an actual story. How do you write for that? How do you work with people? How do you interview people? And it teaches you all those valuable skills and makes that transition just so much easier.
Yeah,
It's
for sure.
great.
Yeah, kind of a funny story is that like the first time I was doing an internship in Topeka, and that's kind of when I first got my experience with public radio. And the first story I turned in was just like a daily spot, but I had written it like a print story, and my editor was like, "What is this? Like, you would not say this. Write it like you would say it." And so that was one early lesson I learned. And then another, really something that I think of almost every single day, is that one of the people that I was shadowing under told me that broadcast is the art of what you can leave out. And I think like that could be misconstrued in some way, but it's essentially like you're constantly having these conversations and working through your thoughts in a way to say, how can I make this as concise as possible? Is this piece of information really essential to what's going on, or can I cut this? Because you're working on such a tight time. You know, if you're writing for print, you have 1,000 words up to sometimes, you know. Whereas for radio, you know, we got to get a point across in 30 seconds to a minute. And sometimes our spots are 90 words, 120 words. So you have a lot less time. So that would be a tip that I think about all the time. Ready to move on? So this is this is Brian Grimmett. He's no longer with us, unfortunately. We love Brian, but he was at the station for what, 8 years, 9 years or something like that. So yeah, we wanted to just talk a little bit about recording your voice and maybe some of the tips that we've picked up. Obviously, I don't feel like an expert on voicing. I think that's the thing that I'm still striving toward the most and still working on every day. But we do have a few things that we picked up. So yeah, breathing from your diaphragm. This is like the hardest thing. It's hard for me to even really quite describe, but it's kind of like if any of you guys have singing experience, you probably have learned about this already. But the vocal coach that I worked with told me to think about it as if I had a balloon and I was breathing the air in like that. So you go like that. And so I do that when I'm breathing. Yeah, you guys can try it now if you want. But I do that when I'm getting ready to record a spot. I take a big breath like that, like I'm breathing, like I have a balloon in front of me and I'm breathing the air in. It's kind of like reverse blowing up a balloon, I guess. It's kind of tricky, honestly. Like it's hard to consciously keep doing it. But as you work on it more, you start to feel the difference between, oh, am I breathing with my diaphragm or am I just breathing like normal? But it can give you a lot more power behind your voice, a lot more control and stability, and it makes it to where you're not running out of breath, too. Another tip, this is also difficult. A lot of people, when they first get into broadcast, they want to talk like they're on the radio, and they want to use like a fancy radio voice or something. But oftentimes, most of the time, the best thing is to just try to sound natural. And that's also extremely difficult because I catch myself doing this, too. One way that I've heard our producer say is, you sound like you're getting into a cadence. You know, you don't want it to sound like every sentence is following the same structure of your voice. You want it to sound like you're mixing up your voice because that's how we actually talk. We don't say, you know, 5 sentences in a row and they all have the same cadence, the same meter, the same beat. You know, you want to mix that up so you're sounding like an authentic person. There's something to add there?
No, I was just about to say, like, you see the waveform there. It's pretty like flat, right? And that's how you want to keep your voice while you're talking.
Yeah.
I think when I first started out, I would do kind of the cadence thing, and you could see it in the waveform. It would start out really big and then it would die down because that's how I would talk. And then, you know, my editor would literally, he could see it. I would send him my audio and he'd open it up to listen to it. And as soon as he'd open it up, it would just like immediately tell on me because you could see the big wave and then it dies down. And so he'd look at it and he'd go, "Oh, go back and re-record this."
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, and so I mean, we do have the option to take those waves and kind of like what we call normalizing it, bringing it to a similar sound level. But Kylie's right, you know, that could be one indicator. So I put try standing because I don't think that like all of us at the station stand. I know it's kind of, I actually was asking people, some people, as you can see, Brian's recording sitting down. I personally like to stand because I feel like it gives me better control of what I talked about at the beginning of breathing through your diaphragm. If you're sitting down, like your torso is kind of compressed, it's harder to get that feeling and be able to tell that you're actually working your diaphragm. So I like to stand up when I record. Kylie, do you stand? Do you sit?
I sit if I'm doing like shorter spots. So if I'm doing my short, like 30-second to a minute spots, I kind of sit and I just let it go.
Sure.
Yeah. But if I am recording something that I really want to be good, like a feature, or if it's a little more long form, I'll stand because I want it to be better quality than just my typical radio spots.
Yeah. It's also kind of easy, at least for me when I'm sitting down, to kind of like hide in the lower register of my voice. Like I kind of like am not using the full range of my voice if I'm sitting down. So be animated. So as you guys can see, I use my hands a lot when I talk. That's just part of it. So like if you're seeing me recording in the studio, I'm going to be going like this. I'm going to be
so
going
funny.
like this.
You'll, like, you'll
So-
walk by, you see the little window, and I'll walk by, and Daniel's in there. And he's
Yeah,
like-
because it's how I get my words out. It's how I get it to sound exactly how I want it to, you know. So if you're that type of person, you know, it's going to help you open up. It's going to help you, you know, sound like you're relaxed. You're not all stiff. So I like to be animated when I talk. That's just me. Maybe everybody's different. I don't know. Do you have anything to add as far as that?
I like to do who was it? I think Bill Clinton did this all the time, or Bush, or somebody did this all the time. I do this a lot. I'll see Tom when he's recording like promos and stuff for the range. He likes to do this.
He kind of does this.
Yeah, he does this like all the time when
Yeah.
he's talking, because it kind of gets you in that space and it gets you to be more conversational.
Yeah, I kind of almost use my body language to kind of keep me not talking too quickly as well. Like you can use your body language to kind of keep you in a rhythm. Like I know one thing I always do that's funny is whenever we do what's called an out cue, where we would say, "Oh, I'm for KMUW News, I'm Daniel Caudill." I always motion to myself. I don't know why. It's like for KMUW News, I'm Daniel Caudill. It just makes it come out more naturally. I don't know. So try that. And we've talked a little bit about this already, but you know, you kind of want to speak like you're talking directly to someone. You don't want to sound like you're just recording your voice for the sake of it. And some of the people at NPR go as far as taking a picture of a physical person and putting it in the booth. So whenever they're talking, they can kind of like make eye contact with the person, and it feels like they're having a conversation with someone. I don't go that far. I don't think anybody at KMUW does either, but it's a tip I've heard before. So
I think another note too, when you're recording your voice, and it's going to be hard for me to do an example right now because I am trying to project so that everybody can hear me. But when I originally started out, especially in vocal coaching, before I started talking for radio, and you know, as you're like talking to people today, you can maybe like listen to this, but you know, when you're talking normally, you kind of talk in the back of your head a little bit. And again, it's like really hard for me to do an example because I'm projecting, but you're talking kind of in the back of your head. But then when you're when you're recording for radio, you want to talk more up front and you want to project into that. And so this is kind of like what my voice would sound like on the radio because I am projecting my voice and I'm putting it more up front.
Yeah. Anything else? Okay. So yeah, now we want to talk about probably the most exciting part, which would be to come work with us. So we have internship opportunities at KMUW. I'll get a little more in the nitty gritty of that. That's Kevin Benavides. He'd probably be mad at us for using that picture because this is like 7 years old. But we have 2 interns per semester that work in our news lab. They work along with, you know, me and Kylie, work with Tom. And basically, I mean, you're doing the same work that a reporter would do, just a little bit more introductory or elementary. Like we're not just going to throw you out and expect you to be able to do everything perfectly. So you might start out a little more basic, but the idea is to work you toward applying some of these skills that you could learn. We have 2, like I said, 2 per semester. So right now we've already got our fall interns, but when spring comes around, you guys can keep an eye out for the application for that. It's paid 15 hours a week. And typically the way I understand it, like Tom, when we get a new intern, our boss, Tom, he will have a conversation with you about what your class schedule is like, and he will just work completely around that. So if you have to come in, you know, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or you have to come in the afternoons because you have class in the mornings, we work with that. So like I said, work in the newsroom. You're going to be preparing spots for the radio. You'll get to hear your voice on the radio probably. Learn broadcast reporting fundamentals. So as Kylie said, you might go on the job with us to help us get sound, help us get pictures. But at some point, you'll also get to, you know, put your own stories together. And this last note, basically the way I understand it is that Tom is kind of giving a priority to students who are in the Elliott School in some way, like a journalism major or minor, but you don't necessarily have to be in the Elliott School like that. If you're not in the Elliott School, but this sounds really interesting to you, then go ahead and apply.
I started out as an intern at KMUW back in 2019. I was a summer intern, and honestly, it was a really great experience. I wasn't sure exactly if I wanted to work in public broadcasting. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do in journalism yet, but I decided to intern for them over the summer just to get that experience and just to be able to say I have an internship on top of working at the Sunflower and being an editor and reporter and whatever else it was that I was doing for the Sunflower. And honestly, it's like one of the best experiences you can have, especially for a journalism internship in town. But we've also had marketing students, be interns for us, and they kind of learn how to work with the media through then. So then if they do go into marketing, if they go into PR or something like that, they know what we do, so they can better do their job. But yeah, being a News Lab intern was awesome. I had a lot of really good experiences. I think it's one of the best experiences you can have because you work with really talented, experienced journalists. Tom has been in Wichita and reporting and being an editor for decades, but he's also like the best mentor you could ever have. I think that's why I decided to take my job at KMUW. I actually had quite a few options of where to go, but I decided to go to KMUW because I knew I was going to be able to work with Tom Shine, and I knew he'd be a really great mentor, and I knew he would help me grow as a journalist.
And even if you like are not working at KMUW, Tom Shine's like the type of person that having him in your corner is great. He will write a recommendation letter for you in a heartbeat. He will vie for you if you're going for a job. So
yeah,
he's also just really cool, really fun, really open to story ideas.
Yeah. My first job out of college, I actually got because of Tom Shine.
Yeah.
I wasn't necessarily looking for a job yet, but I was sitting there one day and a TV station called me up here in town. And they said, "Hey, are you looking for a job?" And I was like, "Well, kind of." And they go, "Cool, because Tom Shine talked to us and said that you'd be really good at this job." And that's how I got my first job out of college.
And I didn't get my first internship in broadcast was not this one specifically, but I kind of had a similar experience to Kylie where I went to Topeka and interned for a radio station there. And before then, I'd only had print experience, but it was like doing that and taking that risk, trying something new, made me realize that this is actually maybe what I prefer, broadcast over print. So anything else on the News Lab interns? Okay. And then another internship that we have is the Corva Coleman Diversity Internship. So this one, I believe, we've had 3 now. So I guess 3 years ago.
Yes. So Corva Coleman set this up back in 2019 when I was an intern. We had Media Circus. It's used to be an annual fundraiser that we would have every summer, and it was just like something fun. We would just bring in, a big name from NPR like Corva Coleman. She's a morning edition host, and she's awesome at her job. She's really, really cool. We'd bring in a big name from NPR. They'd talk to our donors. It was just a big fundraiser. But typically, they'll charge a speaking fee or something like that. So, us as a station will have to pay them to come speak at our event. But Corva, instead of charging us a speaking fee, said, let's just set up an internship program and let's gear it towards students of color and get them experience in a newsroom. And so that's exactly what happened. And so we have one intern each summer who will come in, and we've had 3 so far, and they are awesome and they're so fun to work with. The one this past summer, his name was Andrew Lopez. He's a graduate student at Berkeley School of Journalism, and he's awesome.
I miss Andrew a lot.
Yeah, I miss him a lot. He was really cool to work with. I think it was just so funny. Like, he's really good at features, right? And I'm more of a newsy type person, but working with him more kind of made me realize, like, I don't have to be as newsy as I am right now. Like, I can really, like, actually have fun with my pieces, and I can be serious when I need to or want to. And so I started to have more fun with the features I've been putting together. And I think I've been putting together better features because I've been working with, our Corva Coleman interns.
One thing I would say about this one is that the application process might be a little more competitive because you're going to have people applying from out of state. And in fact, I think all of our interns have been from out of state. But I would still highly, highly encourage you to apply for this. I mean, because this is basically going to give you an idea. Like the News Lab internship kind of gets you in there, but at the same time, this one is almost going to simulate more what it's like to be a full-time reporter. You know, you're going to be there 40 hours a week, working in the newsroom, getting to know everybody. And I think maybe the best part is that you get mentoring from Corva Coleman, and it's not just while you're an intern. Like she still continues to mentor Andrew and our other interns that we've had. So that's kind of a lifetime relationship too, just like we were talking about with Tom. So yeah, if you are interested in applying, please go to kmuw.org/employment, or you can just go to the homepage and kind of navigate there from the drop-down menu. We'd love to have you work in the newsroom, and especially if you're, interested after this presentation. But beyond that, we're open for any questions that you might have. Go ahead.
When you're going to report in your public spaces like that, rephrasing. When going to go do interviews in public spaces, what is the process like? Like, do y'all get permits to do places?
Oh, like as far as getting permission? So like public space, typically no, because a public space is like open access to anybody. It's just like what you'll hear about taking photos. You can take a photo in public of anybody legally, technically. It may not always be respectful to do that, but legally you can, and you have that right as a journalist. But like, let's say you want access to like a business, like for example, Leslie, when Kylie did the Leslie story, that's a private business. So that you would have to have a conversation with the owner about the story that you're doing. And most of the time, I mean, especially if you're a private business owner, you're going to want the publicity. So a lot of times they're okay with it. Have you had any issues where you've like tried to do an interview somewhere and weren't allowed?
Not that I can recall, honestly.
Yeah, not really. I mean, most of the time, yeah, like, and there's ways to work around that. Like, for example, my Starbucks story that I showed earlier, I knew from the jump that Starbucks was not going to let me in one of their facilities because they don't want this story. They don't like the union drive, obviously. So in that case, I kind of had to get creative. I said, well, what if we just go to another coffee shop? Gives me some of the same types of sounds I'm wanting, but I don't have to worry about like going through it with Starbucks management, if that makes sense. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead.
Do you guys do any live broadcasting, or is everything pre-recorded?
Yeah, everything's pre-recorded. We did recently have a conversation. There are times, very, 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 and I mean like very rarely, that we will go live. And typically how that works out is, I mean, for example, like we recently had a conversation about should we go live on election night this year. We decided against it because we don't have very competitive races here. I think it was more of like NPR reached out to us and was like, hey, like, do you guys have any competitive races going on? Can we, they'll have you call in. So you'll be, sorry, I'm going to grab your phone. Okay. You'll be on the phone, and NPR or whoever, the station will call you, and you'll be talking about what's going on around you. That's typically.
We also...
but the hosts are live.
Right, that's what I was going to say. Like our newscaster, the way it works is like we do our local newscast every hour at about 03. So like 103, 203, 303. And it's a handful of local stories that have been produced by us. The process is kind of like this. I finish my spots, I hand them over to my editor, and he's the one who decides at what hour is this spot going to air. And then we have newscasters. We have Kate Hutchins, John Huber, Fletcher Powell, anybody else? Just those three, I think. And then sometimes we have Lou Stevens will go on air.
Yeah, and our general manager too will sometimes, Deborah Frazier.
Yeah, those are the people who kind of have the burden of actually being live on air. But their job is kind of to be a host, just like in broadcast. They'll say, this is KMUW News, they give the weather, and then they start going into the stories. So they might have a little blurb to read, and then they press play, and then you'll hear our voice, kind of like that. 99% of what we do as reporters, though, is pre-recorded. We did have our pledge drive recently, too.
Oh, yeah, and we'll be live for that.
Yeah, like a pledge drive is kind of like, we're manning the phones, calling people, getting people to call in to donate to the station, and we do what's called pitching. So we have to go live on air, talk about the station, talk about what we do, try to encourage people to donate. And that's usually just 2 times a year or 3 times a year.
2 times a year. We have a fall and a spring.
Yeah, fall and a spring. So, yeah, usually pre-recorded. Anybody else? Go ahead.
You
Mhm.
Would you just restart every single story?
I think I've never done that. I've never used nat sound from previous, but one example I can think of, we have a woman at our station named Beth Golay, and she does a program called En Route. And so she talks to people on the bus. In that scenario, I think she has reused some sounds because she'll get sounds of the door opening, the engine starting, all that kind of stuff, the brakes. And I think she does reuse some of that. Maybe I don't know. I think she does, but most of the time I'd say it's better practice to just go ahead and start over.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't mean.
No, that's good.
Yeah, I mean, I try not to just because I don't want it to be fake.
Yeah.
I want to be real. Lindsay thought that was funny. We're on Be Real. Like recently, I mean, I showed you guys that Leslie coffee shop story, but I recently had to go back for actually a national feature that I was working on about the community fridges. And instead of reusing that natural sound that I gathered while I was there before, I decided to just re-record it anyways, just because then it also makes meshing everything together a bit easier.
Another thing that I guess we didn't really talk about as far as natural sound goes is like, usually we're collecting that sound for feature-length stories. So those are 3 to 4 minutes long. That's the type of story that you're getting nat sound. But most of the time when it comes to your daily spots that you're filing, those like 30-second to a minute spots, there's rarely any nat sound in there. Sometimes there may be an opportunity for a little bit, but because you're just so pressed for time, you don't really work a lot of that sound in there. So usually we're worrying about nat sound when it comes to features, not necessarily just the daily grind. So go ahead, Lindsay.
Are there any ethical problems with reusing sound?
Yeah.
I know that you like to be real, obviously.
I think so. Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
I guess there could be an argument like in Beth's situation because she's kind of doing a similar, like she's always in the same place. But what was it that Huber said at the newsroom the other day? Like
We had a conversation actually recently about that.
Yeah, I can't remember what Huber said. He said something good though. Like
you don't want to manufacture it.
That's what he said. Yeah.
Yeah, you don't want to manufacture it. I think I was having the hardest time with my feature that I did about the community fridges, trying to find, I wanted to tag along with someone as they were grocery shopping and then filling up those community fridges because I wanted to get that sound of the fridge being stocked and checking out at the grocery store and stuff like that. So I was having the hardest time, and it almost got to a point where I was like, well, can I just go grocery shopping and record myself filling up the fridge? And they were like, no, like you can't do that. Like you need to go find someone.
Yeah, that's a good example. Or like another example might be like you want to use a rain sound or something like that, but it wasn't raining when you did your interview. Like there's no reason to do that. It's not worth the extra sound you're getting out of it because you're kind of manipulating what happened. Or like if it was raining, then get sound of it raining there. Don't just rely on, I'm going to get rain sound from somewhere, because we just don't really do that. Because that sounds to me more like something you might do in like fiction writing or, like a movie or something. And it kind of comes back to like, I almost liken it to in print journalism, you're not supposed to pose photos. Like you're not supposed to tell somebody, can you pretend you're doing this so I can get a photo? Because that's like manipulating what actually happened. I kind of liken it to that. Think of it as very similar. I think we still have a few more minutes, right? Are we at 12? Amy, are we at 12? What time are we out? 12?
We have it doesn't matter. We can go 10 or 15 more minutes.
Okay. Well, I mean, presentation's done, but if you guys have questions, we're happy to answer them. So.
And we'll stay here and answer questions.
Yeah, we'll hang out. If you guys have one-on-one questions.
We do. Go
ahead. Sorry.
We do have all this swag, but we also have business cards. So if you want to keep in contact, that'd be cool. I'm always happy to answer questions, always happy to grab coffee, whatever.
Yeah.
If you want to intern for us, that's also a good way to kind of get in.
Yeah,
too.
For sure.
So.
Thank you, guys. What do you say, Amy?
I interrupted your class. Since you all mentioned Comm showing so much,
Yeah.
he does teach our editing class.
Oh, yeah.
In the spring, every spring, usually. So that's Comm 510.
Oh.
It's a great way to get to know him.
90% chance I will also be teaching in the spring if it follows through. I'll be teaching media and politics. I think it's through the political science department, but there might be some sort of partnership with the communications school. So,
thank you guys.